in order to examine this, what we actually need to do is we need to give some context to this. We need to understand who Jeffrey Epstein was, what his connections were, and why it is that people would even entertain the idea that this guy would be murdered. I mean, who is he? Why would elites, who would want to murder him? And how would they have that opportunity? So I think that's the best thing that we can do is basically start at the beginning, see who Jeffrey Epstein is, and see if there's anything that can help inform us um, to build on the facts that we know. So Jeffrey Epstein was born 1953 in Brooklyn. His mother, Pauline, was a school aide and a homemaker, and his father, Seymour, was a groundskeeper. He's got a younger brother called Mark, and he grew up in Seagate, Coney Island. So contrary to what people might believe, he wasn't born into money by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, he was actually born into incredibly modest backgrounds. Where did he get his money? Bit of a mystery. We're going to examine that. Like, it's obviously a bit of a bright spark, this Epstein. Like, he started playing piano at age 5, and he graduated from Lafayette High School 2 years early, age 16. He actually skipped 2 years because he's that bright. Like, this is pretty much a prodigy kid. Now, what was weird though was he spent 1971 to 1974 at the Curran Institute of Mathematical Sciences at New York Uni, and he left before he finished his degree. This was an incredibly capable person who just basically, as far as we can see, breezed the courses. People just seem to say that he was just kind of not interested, though, just a bit sort of lazy, really. He just couldn't be really bothered, almost like he felt he was above it. Um, Now, this is where it starts being a little bit strange because in September 1974, he starts work as a physics and maths teacher, which he has absolutely no qualifications for. And he's doing this at a place called the Dalton School, which is in the Upper East Side of New York, which is a very, very posh neighborhood. And the headmaster at the time was Donald Barr. Now, if that name sounds familiar, William Barr was the district
Oh
attorney
no.
under the Trump administration. So Donald Barr was actually William Barr's father, and he personally hired Epstein. Now he resigned just before Epstein actually started working there, but he definitely was the person that hired him. A couple of strange things about Donald Barr. One, during World War II, he was actually a member of the OSS. Now, the OSS was the precursor to the CIA. So he's essentially involved in the burgeoning beginnings of the American intelligence agencies. That's Donald Barr, right at the very inception. This was pre-CIA, and this is quite a big deal. He was also, a man of hobbies, Donald Barr. It's important to have hobbies and interests. And in 1973, he released a fictional novel that he'd written called Space Relations. Now, this is a sci fi novel in which the main thrust of the plot is that teenage girls are enslaved by big muscular men and they're raped for pleasure and forced procreation.
In space?
Well, I don't know exactly where it is. I think it's on a distant planet. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, but it's certainly a bit of a strange one. Now, Epstein worked at this school for a long time, and there was no sort of hint that he'd done anything sort of sexual with any of the kids or anything like that. But he certainly was noticed as being a bit weird and a bit sort of off kilter. Years later, in a deposition for the first time that he was arrested, he was asked about what sort of age that were the students that he taught, and he reassured them. He goes, "Oh no, they were very old. They were really old. These kids. They were like 17. So, too old for him." Like, now, people who went to this school were people like Prudence Murdoch, who's the daughter of Rupert, the fashion designer Jill Stewart, and Jennifer Grey, who is the actress from Dirty Dancing. They were all actually students whilst Epstein was at the school. Now, again, he was seen as being a bit flirty with girls, but nothing untoward happened. Although he did have a habit of turning up without being invited at student parties and just sort of standing there looking a bit creepy. Yeah, which is a bit unusual. Um, Now, what's also strange is that the head teacher, Gardner Dunnan, who took over from Barr, was also accused, although I believe he was acquitted, of sexually abusing a 14-year-old girl who he had lived with him. So immediately, we're starting to see there's some strangeness going off with some of these people by the looks of it. In 1976, Epstein was dismissed from Dalton. They say for poor performance. There's no sort of further explanation as to why he was dismissed, but they just say poor performance. Now, at a teacher parent meeting just prior to him being sacked, he was knocking around with Lynn Koppel. Now, Lynn Koppel is the daughter of famed banker Alan Greenberg. And basically, she was actually tutored in mathematics by Epstein. And Alan Greenberg met him at this event at the school and immediately offered him a job as a broker and a trader at Bear Stearns, which at the time was one of the largest sort of banking corporations in New York. Now, to be fair, anyone could get a job being a broker. They just wanted somebody that was sort of, a bit vicious, a bit sort of go-getting, and understood numbers and stuff like that. So it's not that unusual. However, within an incredibly short time, less than 4 years, he'd become a limited partner of the entire firm, which means that he's not on CEO level, but he was just under that. So he's not a major partner, but he's literally just under that. And he's going from being a floor trader to advising clients such as Seagram's Gin and Edgar Bronfman. And these are sort of major sort of like corporations that involve huge amounts of money. And so he's handling ridiculous sums of money for enormous firms that usually would go with people with a lot more experience and a lot more sort of qualifications.
But he did like go through school really quick, and he's a mathematical genius.
He's evidently a genius. This is the thing. So, like, he is evidently sort of incredibly skilled at this type of thing. So, I assume his results speak volumes. But it's an incredibly fortuitous sort of path that
Totally.
this man's taken. He seems to have very sort of easily fallen into very favourable conditions, like with minimal effort, by the looks of it.
We've all watched those Wall Street films, though. There's sometimes people are just geniuses at Wall Street shit.
Yeah, totally. And I think it would be fair to assume, no spoilers, that Epstein is also a very ruthless and very self-centered person. Like, if you're dealing with that sort of cold logic, and he's also a mathematical genius, and he understands the markets and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's not ludicrous to imagine, but at the same time, this person is being given a lot of opportunities by very, very prominent people.
It's definitely like he's destined to excel.
Yes, very much so. Even without, so you'd you'd be slightly concerned if you were his father or whatever. That, oh, he's dropped out of university. What's he going to do now? Well, he's landed on his feet with that job. Well, he's got sacked from that. Well, he's landed on his feet with this job as well. It's not suspicious per se, but it's like he's certainly fortunate. However, the following year, so a year after he'd been made a limited partner, he was actually forced to leave after, euphemistically, it was said, getting into trouble. Now, what he did was something called a Reg D violation, and I can't quite understand exactly what it was, but it appears that basically he lied about something in regards to financial dealings, either overestimated something or used money in an appropriate way, and it's so serious that essentially he's lost his license to practice, or had to leave the firm in disgrace, basically. But at the same time, what he's done is he's formed a company called the Intercontinental Assets Group, which recovered stolen money from brokers and lawyers. And Epstein actually described this as working basically as a sort of like high level bounty hunter. So he'd go after companies and get money that they owed other companies, and then he'd take a cut of that money, basically. Now, perhaps he was actually sort of helped in this because there's an article that came out in 2001 that's been pretty much scrubbed from the internet. You can get it, but you have to do a bit of digging. It's from the Evening Standard. And basically, the reason this is difficult to get hold of is because in the article it says that in the 1980s, Epstein was going around and telling anybody that would listen to him that he was actually a CIA spy. And there seemed to be some sort of corroborating evidence for this. The article says that this witness or this person that they interview says that I know that Jeffrey has a license to carry a concealed weapon. He's claimed to have worked for the CIA, although now, if you ask him, he will deny it. And he once arrived at the home of a British arms dealer bringing a gift, a New York police issue pump-action riot gun. God only knows how he got it into the country. So what this story says is that basically, like Epstein in the 80s, pretended to be a CIA. Somehow he managed to get a pump-action riot gun, which is one of those beanbag sort of tear gassy type guns, into the country to give it as a gift to an arms dealer. Why he was meeting this arms dealer isn't entirely clear.
Also, you feel like an arms dealer could get his own pump action riot gun.
Well, yeah, potentially, yeah, but it's certainly a strange turn of events. Now, also at the time, he was rolling around with a fake Austrian passport. This basically had his name and his picture, false name, claiming that he was an Austrian citizen. And when this was discovered in 2019, it had been used several times. He'd travelled to Saudi Arabia, he'd travelled to Spain, he'd travelled to France, and he'd travelled to the UK. And all of these stamps were in the 80s. So in the 80s, he's claiming to be a CIA agent, and he's rolling around on a fake Austrian passport, which is...
I think in the 80s, everyone had a fake Austrian passport, though.
Well, Brent, you were saying that there could be a reason, like for the use of a fake Austrian passport, particularly to go to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I'm sure it was his defense that was saying that he had a fake passport so that he could travel to countries under a false name because he was, Epstein, he was Jewish, and it was to stop him from getting harassed in countries that were anti-Semitic.
But the point being that he's making these claims, and he's got this strange passport. Another interesting thing that was revealed in this article was that at the time he's working as a financial advisor or helping the finances of a bloke called Adnan Khashoggi. Now, if that name's familiar, Adnan Khashoggi was actually a middleman in the fabled Iran-Contra weapons scandal, which was going on in the 80s. Now, just to give a very brief overview, the American government was selling arms to Iran, and it was using the profits to buy cocaine from the Contras, which was this Nicaraguan right-wing military government, essentially, that they wanted to promote to quell left-wing uprising in Nicaragua. And they used that cocaine to turn into crack and to sell through people like Danilo Blandon to Freeway Ricky Ross and Michael Harris and various prominent members of the drugs industry in Los Angeles. At the time, it was illegal to be trading with Iran. So there is so much dodginess that was going off with that particular incident. And somehow Jeffrey Epstein is connected to this via Adnan Khashoggi, who was basically acting as a broker in these weapons deals at the time.
And just another fun link, Adnan Khashoggi is also, he's Dodi Fayed's uncle.
Exactly, yeah, that's exactly right. And also his other nephew was Jamal Khashoggi, who was very recently murdered in the Saudi Arabian embassy in Turkey. And but he met a rather grisly end. He was strangled to death after being tortured. And then his body was cut up with a bone saw and taken out of the embassy in diplomatic bags. So, again, just another of these sort of fun connections to the Epstein network.
2 degrees of conspiracy.
Well, isn't it just? But there is method to my madness that will become apparent sort of towards the end. Now, where did Epstein get his money from? Okay, this is one of these things that nobody seems to know. He's obviously sort of very skilled in financial markets and stuff like that. But one of the people that basically seem to give him huge amounts of money, for example, his New York mansion, was a gift from a billionaire called Leslie Wexner. Now, Leslie Wexner was the CEO of the underwear company Victoria's Secret. Wexner was also, rubbed shoulders with very, very prominent people. In, to say, 2008, for example, he accompanied President George W. Bush to Israel as a guest of his to celebrate the country's 60th anniversary. Now, Epstein handled all of Wexner's air freight business and his art collection. And now, just to give an example, one piece that Wexner owned was a Picasso that was worth $45 million. So this guy has got an incredibly extensive portfolio, and he entrusted Epstein to look after it, trade it, and basically handle his finances. He became Wexner's financial advisor in 1987, and in 1991 he was actually granted power of attorney by Wexner, which meant that he had complete control of all his assets and had decision-making status for essentially Victoria's Secrets and everything that this billionaire touched. When asked why, and this again comes from that 2001 Evening Standard article, it says, "He's Mr. Wexner's Mr. Fix-It. He has these spook connections. He pulls the strings worldwide, he handles all the logistics, and he moves the portfolio around for him." And spook is a inference that basically he's got spy / intelligence connections. Like spook is another word for spy, basically. So again, a lot of strangeness sort of running through the background. By 1995, he'd become the director of the Wexner Foundation, and through this and taking fees for handling Wexner's finances, he'd become a multimillionaire. But it's still not entirely known where exactly this money came from. It's very, very sort of shrouded in mystery. In 1996, we have the first sort of claim of sexual assault against Jeffrey Epstein. An artist named Maria Farmer claimed that she was sexually assaulted by Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell at Wexner's home in Ohio. She also said that she'd been to his Palm Beach home, and as early as 1996, she'd seen a room with loads of monitors in it that was clearly recording all the bedrooms and bathrooms of the house. And she was told that this was in order to record people, in order to essentially blackmail them. Also, at the time, she says that her 15-year-old sibling was also assaulted by Jeffrey Epstein. She also said that basically she saw lots of young girls coming and going from Jeffrey Epstein's New York mansion. One person who was almost a permanent fixture of this residence in New York was prominent lawyer Alan Dershowitz. Now, also the same year in 1996, there was a model called Alicia Arden, and she also claimed that she was sexually assaulted by Epstein, who had basically pretended to be a recruiter for Victoria's Secret, took her to a hotel room, and then sexually assaulted her. And apparently he did this quite a lot. This was a known thing to avoid Jeffrey in Victoria's Secrets. Wexner was made aware of this a number of times, and he just chose to not act on it, which is worrying to say the very least. In 1987, Epstein basically teamed up with a man called Stephen Hoffenberg, who's a financial consultant. And this is another place where people suggest that Epstein might have got his money from. They set up a consultancy called Towers Financial Corp. And this is basically, they styled themselves as corporate raiders, which is basically, we're going to go into these failing companies, we're going to buy up all the stock, we're going to turn it into something successful, and we're going to make huge, they're flipping businesses in the way that other people might flip houses, or essentially like taking all the assets from them. Some of them they'll make better, some of them they'll just wreck. But it actually turned out to be nothing of the sort. It turned out to be a Ponzi scheme, an incredibly complicated Ponzi scheme in which they stole $450 million from investors.
Yikes.
Yes, bank, So in 1995, 2 years after the company was imploded, after this came to light, Hoffenberg, who was the partner in the business, went to prison for 20 years. Epstein didn't. Epstein completely avoided any scrutiny, even though he was an integral part of the company. Now, he had actually left the company in 1989, but that really has no bearing on it, because basically he was partner in the company at the time that they were committing these fraudulent acts. When Hoffenberg was asked why he didn't give evidence against Epstein, which would have actually lessened his sentence, what he said was quite telling. He said that he was scared because Epstein had traction with the US Department of Justice. He says, "You cannot grasp the magnitude of Epstein's controlling effect." He said that Epstein was able to avoid justice because of being needed by the CIA or the FBI for intelligence, because he was manipulating the American intelligence for overseas organizations. Now, Stephen Hoffenberg's badly decomposed body was found evidently murdered in 2022. So again, we can't really ask him anymore about what he meant by those statements. But he also was there when Epstein met Ghislaine. Basically, he said that he was first introduced in the late 80s by Robert Maxwell. So it was Robert Maxwell that actually introduced him to his daughter. And some people would even go so far as to suggest that Robert Maxwell actually provided financial aid to Jeffrey Epstein. So who on earth was Robert Maxwell? Well, Robert Maxwell is a paper magnate, essentially. Like, he owned a publishing company. So he's born in 1923, and he's actually got a slightly interesting background. Fled Nazi occupation, and most of his family sadly died in Auschwitz. But he joined the Czech army in France in 1940. So, he's still very young in joining the army. And in 1943, so he'd be 20 at this point, he's transferred to the British North Staffordshire Regiment, and he fights in the war. He got a military cross for storming a machine gun nest in 1945, which is, that's incredibly brave. And in 1946, he began working in the press corps in Berlin. After the war, he became a businessman, owned several publishing companies, and he's basically best known for owning the Mirror group of papers. The Daily Mirror is a left-leaning tabloid newspaper in the UK, and he owned this. But he died in mysterious circumstances in 1991. He fell off his yacht in the middle of the ocean, apparently after suffering a heart attack. But many, many people, including his daughter, Ghislaine Maxwell, believe that he was murdered. They believe, they don't explain explicitly why, but they think that he was murdered. A couple of very interesting things about Maxwell that were revealed after his death. One, that he'd stolen millions of pounds from the Mirror pension fund, basically. So he'd stolen money from employees and businesses that he owned in order to pay off spiraling debts and to continue living this lifestyle. So completely fraudulently. So if he had have survived, it would very much look like he was going to get punished for these criminal acts. But also, it was revealed in 2007 that Robert Maxwell had a penchant for bugging and recording people that he suspected of being disloyal. So in his home and in various offices that he owned, he would set up hidden cameras and hidden microphones set up by his head of security in order to catch people out and to clandestinely listen in on conversations, which is very interesting when you realize that that is what Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine were also accused of. Now, again, there's also a big suggestion that actually Robert Maxwell was connected to various intelligence agencies, various spy agencies. Like, for example, in the 1948 Israeli-Arab War, it was actually Maxwell who acted as a conduit between the Czech government and the Israeli government, helping provide military assistance, weapons, and smuggling aircraft parts into Israel. And apparently he was basically considered vital for the war effort. The UK Foreign Office has said on numerous occasions that they thought that Maxwell was a double or even a triple agent, and they felt that he was, if not working for Mossad, almost certainly financed by Russia. Apparently, he had links to MI6, the KGB, and Mossad, and 6 former heads of Israeli intelligence attended his funeral in Jerusalem, at which Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir said, "Maxwell has done more for Israel than can be told." Now, Mossad agent Ari Ben Menash of the Israeli military intelligence said that Maxwell was actually involved in the Mossad kidnap of an Israeli nuclear technician who had sold secrets to the Sunday Times. And John Major had also said that Maxwell had provided valuable insights during the attempted coup of the Soviet Union in 1991. So again, just a very interesting aside that it looks like Maxwell might be sort of rolling in that same circle again, like the intelligence agencies and potentially even sort of blackmail. Now, his daughter, Ghislaine, who's introduced to Epstein at the point, and would go on to become a procurer of young women for him. She's born in 1961. She grew up in a mansion called Headington Hill Hall in Oxford. Now, this is interesting. She knew Boris Johnson at school. Now, Boris Johnson's sister, Rachel Johnson, made a rather ill-advised attempt to try and sort of uh, do a bit of PR work on Ghislaine by doing an article that said, I feel very, very sorry for Ghislaine in the circumstance that she is. And in this, it said,
Oh God.
yes, quite. As a fresher, I wandered into Balliol JCR one day in search of its subsidised breakfast granola and Nescafe offering, and I found a shiny glamazon with naughty eyes holding court astride a table, a high-heeled boot resting on my brother's thigh. And her brother was the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And so Ghislaine knows all these people. She's a prominent socialite. She's a former club owner in London. She's worked for the European magazine, and she actually was a director at Oxford United Football Club, which they don't tend to publicise. Again, she thought that her father was murdered, and shortly after his murder, she moved to New York and struck up a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Apparently, she was completely enamored with Epstein and really wanted him to marry her, and he treated her pretty poorly. But for some reason, she stayed within his circle, and after they finished the relationship, she became almost like his PR agent and the person that would ingratiate him into society circles. He once said that basically, like, he only becomes friends with people after he's split up with them. So he felt that being friends with them was far more respectful than being in a relationship with them. Now, to me, that just sounds like flim flam by the sort of manipulative sod that would keep somebody, like, hanging on for them. But who knows? Now, interestingly, Ghislaine actually attended Chelsea Clinton's wedding in 2010. And this is brought up by a lot of people as sort of proof that, again, another link to the Clintons, another suggestion that basically, like, the Clintons are in on this somehow. But it actually transpires she was only there as a plus one. She was there as the guest of a bloke called Ted Waite, who owns a company called Gateway Computers, which I'd never really heard of. But yes, so she was there as a plus one. So yes, she did go, but it wasn't actually at the behest of the Clinton family.
Because you said this is 2010, and was it 2008 that he had been arrested prior?
Yes, yes. So
Having her at the wedding is a bit suspicious.
it
Okay.
certainly doesn't look good in retrospect, does it? So, but again, it's not. She wasn't the guest. She just happened to be the plus one, really. So the timeline jumps a little bit because of all the people, but we're back in 1989 now, and at this time, Jeffrey Epstein was photographed with two prominent people in the fashion industry. One was Donald Trump, and one was a bloke called John Casablancas. John Casablancas basically owned a modeling agency. He's the person that invented the concept of the supermodel, like promoting this model as an entity, not just a clothes horse, which also basically works to hype up the clothing. And it's a sort of one of these things where everyone benefits from it. But unfortunately, there are some dodgy things in this guy's life. When Ivanka, Trump's daughter, was age 13, John Casablancas became her manager in the modeling industry, which might not have been the best or the most judicious decision. You see, he's an accused paedophile and trafficker of women, known to have had numerous relationships with young girls. One of them was Stephanie Seymour, famous model. When he was 41 and she was 15 years old, had an extended relationship. When he was 50 years old, he married a 17-year-old. Now, interestingly, if you've heard that name, Casablancas, before, his son is the lead singer of The Strokes. You know, the rock band The Strokes? That's his lad, basically. In 1991, at a party held by fashionista Jean-Luc Brunel, a model, Tiesa Husman, met Epstein. And basically, she asked him what she needed to do to get on in the modeling world. And his exact words were, "You need to be willing to do anything. And I mean anything." And then he propositioned her for sex. Now, also, Brunel along with Casablancas, was accused of providing girls for Epstein and was on his flight log numerous times. And he was arrested in 2021 for drugging and raping girls, but he never stood trial because Brunel killed himself. Do you want to know how he killed himself?
Hanging.
He hung himself.
I would be
in a
disappointed if it
Yeah.
wasn't that.
Exactly.
You see a pattern.
Yeah. Now, there was a thing, basically, that these agencies were doing. And John Casablanca's agency did it, Jean-Luc Brunel's agency did it, and Donald Trump's agency did it. What they would do, they would traffic girls into America and from various European destinations, with the proviso that they were going to be models, that they were going to be huge, huge stars, but they wouldn't provide them with a work visa, which meant that they couldn't actually do any modeling when they actually arrived in the country. And the other problem was they were put up in very, very crap apartments, but very, very overpriced apartments. So very, very soon they would actually end up owing money to the modeling agency with no means of making it back, no means of making any money, and they're not supposed to be doing any work because they're there on a holiday visa. At which point it would be suggested to them that they could probably go to these parties and potentially hook up with these men. And this would be twofold. One, the men might pay them, and two, if you do that, we might give you a modeling contract. That would never actually happen. But this was how these modeling agencies were trafficking people, essentially. So trafficking is the act of moving someone illegally over a border for some sort of work purpose, usually sexual. So literally just moving them for that purpose is considered trafficking. And then these people would technically be prostituted as well. In 1992, Epstein is filmed with a very... Now, I don't wish to slander the gentleman, but to my eyes, in my opinion, he looks to be coked up to the nines. Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein partying at Mar-a-Lago, with Donald Trump sort of gyrating and keep saying, "Look at that one, she's hot," grr, and grinding his teeth because he's a tenacious fellow, not because he's driven by some sort of propulsant. Like, that would be slanderous. But so this is when he's friends with Epstein. Now, not just Donald Trump. In 1993, Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell went to the White House for a donor event held by Bill Clinton, and Bill Clinton was there, and they definitely met him. In 1993, also they met Clinton aide Mark Middleton 3 times. Each occasion was at the White House. And in 1995, Epstein and Maxwell also turned up at a separate fundraiser that was held for the Clinton family. So he's establishing these connections. He's definitely trying to ingratiate himself with the great and the good, so to speak. That'd be Donald Trump, the Clintons, and various other members of high society. In 1996, John Casablancas, the accused paedophile and trafficker who was the manager of Ivanka Trump, we must remember, held a party with Donald Trump, and models were forced to take their knickers off and walk on tables so that Trump and Casablancas could look up their skirts and comment. Which, is just a little insight into the sort of classy things that Donald Trump would do with his accused paedophile friend. Now, according to journalist Michael Wolff at this similar time, Trump, Epstein, and a man called Tom Barrack were known around New York as the Three Musketeers. They basically had almost a competition to see who could bed the most beautiful models. And what's interesting is, although Donald Trump claims not to be friends with Jeffrey Epstein prior to about sort of 2009, Tom Barrack has never not been friends with Jeffrey Epstein, and Tom Barrack has never not been friends with Donald Trump. In fact, Donald Trump actually gave him a position within his cabinet, so to speak. So administration is the word I'm looking for. So that's really a little bit concerning. There was a very famous quote from the year 2000. A porter that worked at the New York mansion of Jeffrey Epstein said, "This is crazy. I see celebrities like Donald Trump and loads of young models coming and going, mostly at night." And also in the year 2000, journalist Michael Corrigan saw Epstein taking a teenage girl on Trump's private plane. So this girl, he said, she might have been of age, but she certainly looked to be about 13, 14. She was very heavily made up, but she was very thin, flat-chested, pale, wisp of a girl. Epstein took her on Donald Trump's private plane. What the destination was isn't entirely clear. Now, also at the same time, in 1994, it has been alleged by a lady called Katie Johnson that Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein raped her in the New York mansion of Epstein. She says that she was 13 at the time, that she was lured there by Epstein with hopes of a modeling career. And according to the lawsuit, which was raised in 2016, Trump threatened to make her disappear like Maria, who apparently is some 12-year-old girl who's also, like was mentioned, implying that if she spoke, Donald Trump would have her mafia style rubbed out. The lawsuit contained confirmation from a second witness called Tiffany Doe and a classmate who was called Joan Doe. So, as well as the main person, there's two people that seemingly corroborate this statement. However, this is a bit strange because Johnson had previously filed a lawsuit in 2016 in California, and the address that she'd given was a derelict home. Nobody lived in this house. Now, this might have been explained by the fact that she was actually homeless at the time, and that she just gave an address that she felt that there would be a correspondence address or whatever. But it's one of many things that are quite strange about the way that this case has come about. Now, the original lawsuit actually said that Trump, after having sex with her, had thrown money at this girl and said, "There, go and have an abortion," and also that he'd called Epstein a Jew bastard. But and this is the sort of salacious details of the lawsuit that some people tend to think gives the impression that it might not be as accurate as some people would want it to be. Like, the lawsuit was promoted by a man called Al Taylor, who that was what he said his name was, but it wasn't him. It turned out to be a bloke called Norm Lubow, who had previously been a producer for the Jerry Springer Show, which immediately says, like, oh, this is a bit strange. And this man has a history of making false claims to the media in order to generate publicity. It was also the second person that promoted this Katie Johnson case was a bloke called Steve Bayer, who's an anti-Trump, anti-abortion activist, who's also got a history of making false accusations about politicians. Now, this doesn't mean that the girl is lying, but it certainly raises concerns about the people that brought this lawsuit to prominence. Now, what happened was, basically, prior to giving a press conference, this lawsuit was completely dropped. This Katie Johnson basically claimed that she'd been scared off and decided that she really didn't want to have anything more to do with it. But actually, if we're in the interest of actual fairness, it does look like this case might be a little bit of a publicity stunt. Who knows? Because literally all we know is that this is the story, and the people that put it forward are very, very cagey, and then the lawsuit was dropped before it actually went any further. It could be viewed either way, but there's certainly not a strong level of evidence for it. In 1996, Epstein started moving all his financial trusts to the US Virgin Islands because it's a tax haven, basically. In April 1998, he buys the island, the very famous island. It's a bit of a snip, actually. He got the entire island for $7.95 million, that seems like a bargain. It's quite reasonable, to be quite
Wow.
honest.
Yeah. Well, how much was that Picasso? 45 million?
Yeah, exactly. So, he's certainly got the money. And it's called Little St. James, but actually, basically, everybody calls it Little St. Jeff, or various other sort of more salacious nicknames for it. Now, the island is one of these sort of places where potentially he's taken people. Like, by 2008, the island had 70 staff, and some of these staff have revealed who's been guests at the island. Now, this is often seen as absolute proof that these people are paedophiles. It really isn't. And actually, the number of people who we know to be on the island is significantly smaller than I suspected or thought. The people that we know were there were various Victoria's Secret models, were regular visitors. Les Wexner, he was a regular visitor. Prince Andrew is listed on flight logs as a guest once, but staff say that he was there very regularly. There's a famous picture that was taken in 2006 that has Stephen Hawking's there. He visited. Now, he actually visited for a conference that was put on, a physics conference that was put on, and also in the photo with him, a famous physicist, David Gross, and Lisa Randall. I have no idea who these people are. Apparently, in the world of physics, they're quite big cheeses. But this is the thing. Epstein was interested in these sorts of things and would put on conferences that prominent people would go, and they're perfectly legitimate conferences as far as we can see. Just happened to be on this island with where later it was discovered all sorts of dodginess was going off. Apparently, David Copperfield proposed to Claudia Schiffer on the island in 1993, which is lovely and romantic, isn't it? That's one to tell the grandkids. Although, if rumours that Max Clifford actually arranged the marriage to hide each of those parties' homosexuality are true, there won't be any grandkids. But anywho, Bill Clinton was apparently seen on the island by witness Virginia Roberts several times, and apparently, again, he's rumoured to have visited several times between 2002 and 2005, although there's actually no flight log evidence, and he denies ever going to the island. Jess Staley, who's the head of Barclays Bank, definitely visited there in 2015. And according to locals and staff, the young girls were always present. And yeah, it basically got lots of nicknames, including the classy paedophile island by the locals because of the prominence of young girls there. Also in 2000, it's a pretty busy year for them. This is where it all starts to fall apart. That's when Ghislaine was first introduced to Prince Andrew, and when Ghislaine first introduced Prince Andrew to Jeffrey Epstein. Now, Andrew claims to have met Ghislaine, in 1999, but his private secretary says that that's nonsense, that they were friends right throughout the 90s, as early as 1991 when she first arrived in New York. Why he's trying to hide this, who knows? So again, the Evening Standard article, you remember the one that was pretty much scrubbed? That was actually a story about saying how Sarah Ferguson was getting really annoyed with Prince Andrew because he's not spending any time with the kids. He's spending time with this socialite, Ghislaine Maxwell, and he's being photographed on yachts in the middle of just off the coast of France with a cadre of very young-looking topless models. So how well do we know that Andrew knows this pair? Well, in February 2000, Andrew and Ghislaine and Epstein definitely went to Mar-a-Lago and spent time in his New York mansion. March of that year, they were all at a fundraiser for the LSO, the London Symphony Orchestra, which was also in New York. In April, he was in New York again with Ghislaine. And in May, Andrew, Ghislaine, and Jeffrey spent some time in New York before going down to Florida and spending time in his Palm Beach mansion. In June of 2000, Andrew took Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein to a party at Windsor Castle that was hosted by the Queen. And the Queen was there. So they're rubbing shoulders with the very, very top of the British royal family. In October, Andrew is pictured with Ghislaine in New York, and he's rumoured to have had a hookup with supermodel Heidi Klum. So, bully for him on that one. In December of that year, he spends a weekend at Sandringham with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine, and this is to celebrate Ghislaine's 39th birthday, and Jeffrey Epstein was there for the entire time. Now, in October 2000, there's a picture of, and again, there's something in his eyes, something is giving him that sort of focus, that what would we call it? Like, that almost like a sort of drugged experience, although it couldn't possibly be that. Like, but he's just very, very sort of like, say, focused and driven in this picture of him outside China White, which is a club in London. And he's also sweating very, very profusely in this picture.
Who's sweating?
Prince Andrew.
Andrew's sweating.
Yes, very much in this.
Are we sure about this?
No.
No,
Are
apparently,
you sure?
yes. I know. I was as
Oh.
shocked as the rest because, as people well know, we'll not spoil it, but just remember, put a pin in the fact that he was sweating. Now, also, in November of that year, Andrew's living in Los Angeles and knocking around with known drug dealer Brett Livingston, and who's also having a fling with a former Playboy model called Denise Mantell. So, living his best life, so to speak. In January 2001, he also goes to Phuket in Thailand with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Now, far be it from me to speculate, but there are certain things that people have been known to go to places like Phuket to acquire.
Snake wine.
Yes, snake wine. There we go. Yes, absolutely. In 2001, in March, this is when Andrew allegedly sleeps with a 17-year-old Virginia Roberts in London at the behest of Ghislaine. And there's a photograph of them in Ghislaine's flat with his arm around him. And she said that she did it because if she refused, Epstein would have her killed. But this can't possibly be the case because two things. One, Andrew remembers vividly that he can't have been having sex with the 17-year-old girl at the early hours of that morning because he was at the Pizza Express in Woking with his two daughters. Now, there's no record of this. There's no evidence to show he's that. And strangely, the staff of the Pizza Express in Woking don't seem to recall a royal visitor, celebrating the birthday of his princess daughter with a couple of margaritas. But also, we know that he can't have possibly slept with Virginia Roberts because she says that he was a big sweaty mess. And as we know, he can't sweat because apparently during the Falklands War, he had an overdose of adrenaline and this stopped him from sweating. Now, I wonder if that overdose of adrenaline was when the HMS Sheffield was being shot. Now, if people want to know about that, go and find out. Google that, how the Sheffield was sacrificed to save Prince Andrew, and find out what the punk band Crass has got to say about that. But that's for another time. Anyway, now other medical experts, your so-called expert will tell you that actually that's nonsense, that an overdose of adrenaline will actually cause you to sweat far more profusely. But they know nothing because Prince Andrew is an honourable man, in many ways too honourable. That's his own words. That's why he kept up this friendship with this known abuser of girls. And so he can't possibly have been there. And yeah, that seems reasonable.
Question.
Yes.
Could he have misspoke and he meant overdose of adrenochrome?
It might be it.
Could have done. Yeah. That seems more plausible, to be quite honest. Also in the same year, basically, he's alleged to have sex with Virginia Roberts in New York and also at Little St. James. And flight logs show that Andrew flew with Epstein and Virginia to Little St. James 3 times in that year, and the dates corroborate with the confession or the explanation from Virginia Roberts. Now, in 2010, this was after his first conviction, Andrew spent 3 days at Epstein's New York mansion and was pictured there and walking through Central Park with Epstein. In 2011, Andrew got $15,000 from Epstein to help his ex, Sarah Ferguson. You remember Fergie? She was massively in debt, and so he was borrowing money from anybody and anybody to pay off her debts. And he borrowed 15 grand off Epstein and gave it to Sarah Ferguson.
That's not very much money.
It's not, is it? It's a strange amount.
No, that's a bit stingy, frankly.
Isn't it just?
That feels like a bar tab for the weekend or something for them.
Yeah, it's like an extravagant party at Pizza Express.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, it also backfired rather heavily, because when it was discovered that this was the source of this loan, people approached Sarah Ferguson from the UK press, at which point she denounced Jeffrey Epstein as a paedophile. Jeffrey Epstein heard this and so sued her.
Ooh.
Awkward.
Yeah. Now, what happened to that lawsuit, we don't know. But yes, that's the torrid tale of Prince Andrew. Now, who's this girl then? So this girl, Virginia Roberts, that accused Prince Andrew, and they basically sort of started the whole thing going, really. She's had a bit of a tragic upbringing. She's, again, born in 1983. She's from Sacramento, California originally. They moved to Palm Beach in 1987. Now, Palm Beach is apparently like incredibly plush at one end of the town, and at the other end of the town, not so much. And so you've got this sort of environment where very, very poor people are sort of mixing or sort of in the shadow of incredibly rich people. And this is essentially how Jeffrey Epstein was able to exert control over not only Virginia, but various other girls. And they say we will come to that. So this poor girl was Virginia Roberts, later known as Virginia Giuffre after being married. This poor girl was molested by a family friend at the age of 7. And from there on, she's had a really torrid life, continually running away, ending up in foster homes, living on the streets as early as age 14, where she was abused again. For 6 months, she lived with a 67-year-old sex trafficker called Ron Eppinger in Miami, and he was trafficking girls using a modeling agency called Perfect 10 Models. And so again, there's this theme that we're kind of seeing run through this whole thing is there. Now, she was actually saved from him when the FBI raided him, and she was found and sent home to her parents. Now, what's interesting is that Ron was good friends with Jeffrey Epstein and was trafficking girls in a very, very similar manner. Now, she goes home aged 14 after having suffered all this terrible abuse already. And her dad is like a gardener or a maintenance manager at Mar-a-Lago. Now, Mar-a-Lago is the golf club and sort of spa and restaurant and sort of complex that Donald Trump owns.
It's the Winter White House.
Yes, exactly. Like where it's perfectly okay to take classified documents so long as you think they're not classified. Yeah. So basically, she's working as a cloakroom girl there. And Ghislaine wanders in and sees her reading a book about massage because she's got an idea that she wants to be a masseuse. And Ghislaine basically says, "Oh, we'll teach you to be a masseuse. If you come and give a massage to my client, we'll train you up and we'll give you a permanent job." And it turns out that her client is Jeffrey Epstein. And basically, what happens is she turns up to give this massage. Jeffrey Epstein says, "Can you get naked, please?" So she does. He starts to sort of grab on her a bit. She sort of doesn't really like it very much. And so he actually stops and just sort of, well, he masturbates in front of her. And he explains to her that this is what he likes to do and that we would very much like it if she could get other girls for him, girls of a similar age that she knows. But from that point on, she says that she was essentially a slave, and she was passed around like a platter of fruit to his friends and associates. And these include Prince Andrew, Alan Dershowitz. So Maria Farmer also said that Alan Dershowitz had sex with her as well. So these are the people that she names. She also names Democratic politician Bill Richardson, hedge fund manager Gleb Dubin, lawyer George Mitchell, and MIT scientist Marvin Minsky. And these are the people on the famed list that were essentially given Virginia Roberts or other girls in order to, for their own sexual pleasure. But she says that basically she got girls for Epstein as well, including a 14-year-old called Carolyn Adriano. And she also asked her ex-boyfriend's younger sister, who was named Crystal Figueroa, if she knew any girls from her school who were kind of slutty. And this was because basically she wanted to impress Epstein and impress Ghislaine and earn some money, which is horrific, really. Like that such a poor thing would be coerced into. Essentially, it's the old mafia tactics of you can't tell on us because we've got something on you as well, which is ironic because that's kind of sort of what they're suggesting is the broader plot for the Epstein sort of recordings and stuff like that. In 2002, luckily, she flew to Thailand to attend a massage course, and she met a young man there who she fell in love with. He became her future husband, and they moved to Australia. Now, she didn't ever think about this again. She phoned Epstein and told him that she was never coming home, and he was angry and hung up on her. But she didn't really think anything more of it until 2007, and she doesn't know how Epstein got her number. He just phones her out of the blue and says that there's a lawsuit that's coming my way, and we want you to not talk, please. And they basically implied that, they're trying to destroy me, and if you're a good friend to me, I'll be a good friend to you. That type of stuff. And this was off the back of Alex Acosta and the revelation that he'd got pretty much a sort of early ride on this sort of early 2000s lawsuit. Anyway, the long and short of it was that despite being completely innocent of all charges and insisting that Virginia Roberts, née Gouffre, was actually lying, for some reason, again, probably because he's too honourable, Prince Andrew decided that the only decent thing to do was to pay Virginia Roberts £12 million. £12 million in damages. You know, that's the sort of thing that to me screams innocent. But, you know, each to their own. Now, about this time as well, Epstein was trying to ingratiate himself into sort of society, and there was a number of pieces that came out of him in the press, particularly a 2002 puff piece in New York Magazine, which had a profile on Jeffrey Epstein. Now, one of the prominent people speaking his praise was a gentleman called Donald Trump. Now, what Donald Trump said of Jeffrey Epstein was, "I've known Jeff for 15 years. Terrific guy. He's a lot of fun to be with. It's even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. There's no doubt about it. Jeff certainly enjoys his social life." So that's in 2003 that Donald Trump is making such statements in New York Magazine. Now, that very same magazine, actually, the year later, Epstein tried to buy that magazine. Now, what's interesting is that about this time, there was an article that came out in Vanity Fair that, again, turned out to be a puff piece on Jeffrey Epstein. Two women, Maria Farmer was one of them, had approached the writers of this article and told them that previously they had been sexually abused by Jeffrey Epstein. And this bit was in the final article that was supposed to go to publication. At the very last minute, for reasons that have never been fully explained, all mentions of sexual abuse were taken out of this Vanity Fair article. Now, this was later revealed a few years later when the same reporter did a follow-up and explained that I knew about this and the trafficking as early as 2003, but nobody was allowed to mention it. And she only knew about it because basically this model had specifically spoken to her, and she was a complete outlier at the time. So this was not well known. Now, again, he's not having a brilliant time of it at these times as well. Between 2002 and 2005, Epstein actually invested and lost $80 million in a hedge fund called DB Zoom Special Opportunities. Now, eventually, he ended up losing a total of $140 million. So, despite the fact that this guy is obviously clearly a financial genius and has a degree of luck certainly throughout life, he didn't always do very well. Now, here's a very, very strange thing. In 2015, it was reported that Epstein had invested in an Israeli security firm, and this was called Homeland Security. And this was intimately connected to the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. The CEO of the firm was Amir Elahi, who was a former Special Forces officer for the IDF. And the director, Pinchas Bukas, was the former Defense Ministry Director General and commander of the IDF cyber unit. The head of the firm, the day-to-day running of it, this firm by Jeffrey Epstein in 2015 was run by former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. So again, this is some very, very strange people that he's rubbing shoulders with. In 2008, when Alex Acosta was giving him the sweetheart deal, Epstein actually spent many months of that year touring Israeli military bases and for a time was going to stay in Israel to avoid any scrutiny and to avoid basically having to face charges, but then decided to actually go home. Now, what was interesting was that in 2021, Mossad agent Ari Ben Manash said, "Oh, Epstein, we knew him. Epstein started working with Israeli intelligence, collecting secrets for us." So there's a bit of an indication that potentially there might be something broader going off with this whole story. So we're now on to the first sexual abuse accusations. And this was in 2005. A woman contacted the Palm Beach Police Department and said that her 14-year-old daughter had been involved in a sex act with a rich guy called Jeff. Now, she didn't know who this guy was. Basically, her daughter had been recruited by an older girl and told to go and give a massage to this bloke, at which point he'd told her to take her clothes off, molested her and masturbated in front of her and then paid her $300. She was actually recruited by a 17-year-old girl called Haley Robson, who this was what they did, which is what Ghislaine and Epstein did. They had a sort of a sort of spider web of girls who were all eager to please them and were all getting paid, and they're going out and getting younger and younger girls to essentially fulfill the sexual predilections of both Ghislaine and Jeffrey. Now, Haley herself, although she's only 17, she'd actually been recruited by a girl called Molly and a lad called Tony. They both introduced her to a woman who comes up in this time and time again called Sarah Kellen. And Sarah Kellen was actually Jeffrey Epstein's assistant. So there's various people that were sort of at the top of this pyramid, for want of a better phrase. Ghislaine, Sarah Kellen. Below that, you've got people like Haley, and you've got Virginia Roberts, and this girl Molly. And then basically they're all spreading out and involving themselves in the crime, but also basically like recruiting dozens and dozens of girls, and they'd get paid. These poor naive girls, like Haley Robson was actually boasting about it. She was saying, "Oh, it's great. I get paid 200 a time. Jeffrey likes them. The younger, the better." And she was heard to say to a friend in a very sort of regrettable folly of youth, "Ooh, I'm just like Heidi Fleiss."
God.
Heidi Fleiss is the celebrity madam that was providing prostitutes for Hollywood, including people like Charlie Sheen. So in that year, 2005, Epstein's mansion was raided. Dozens of pictures of naked underage girls were found. Hidden cameras were found in all the rooms, pinhole cameras. So basically, all the rooms were wired for sound and video. But it appears that he got a bit of a tip-off because another girl that helped him out, a Polish model called Adriana Ross, arrived there the day before the raid and took several computers and laptops away from the building. So it looks like he may have been sort of tipped off somewhat. Now, one of the strange things that they found that corroborated some of the statements made by the girls were that he had copies of Lolita lying around the mansion. And this mansion was very strangely decked out. One of the things that they all remember was there was a stuffed poodle that was on a piano, a grand piano, just completely out of place.
Okay.
Rich people have terrible taste.
Well, also in all the bathrooms and guest bathrooms and in prominent places so that everybody who was there could see them, there was soaps in the shapes of penises and vaginas. And adorning the walls of his New York mansion was apparently dozens and dozens of prosthetic eyes taken from soldiers in the First and Second World
What the
War
hell?
that he'd had framed and put on his wall,
What the
which is very,
hell?
very unusual to say the least. Receipts for books were found there that he'd recently purchased off Amazon. These were S&M 101, A Realistic Introduction, Slavecraft, A Roadmap for Erotic Servitude and Training, and Training with Mrs. Abernathy, a workbook for erotic slaves and their owners. Now, he had a bit of a white knight, bit of a saviour at this point. Does anybody know who this was? It was prominent lawyer Alan Dershowitz. Alan Dershowitz took it upon himself, for no reason that anybody could see, to trawl the internet, particularly MySpace, and basically collate a dossier or a document that showed these girls to be promiscuous, that showed them on MySpace drinking or taking drugs or talking with their friends about sex or talking about their boyfriends in order to basically imply that, for want of a better phrase, Epstein wasn't a paedophile, these girls were little tarts. And that's almost exactly what Max Cady tries to do in Cape Fear. Like it's despicable, and for somebody like Dershowitz to be involved in the smearing of teen and preteen girls in order to protect a client who's been sexually abusing them is just despicable. It's
Terrible.
absolutely
Yeah.
disgusting.
Fuck that guy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, at the same time, Jeffrey was actually phoning all these people, phoning all the victims, and saying things like, "Whoever helps me will be compensated, but those who hurt me will be severely dealt with." Now, what was bizarre about this is that basically, very, very quickly, the state's attorney turned around and went, "We don't need to look at this. This is just going to cause an embarrassment." And he immediately offered Jeffrey Epstein a plea deal where he would get 5 years probation and no criminal record. Now, that seems to be rather light, and that enraged a lot of people, the parents, also the police chief. The police chief, Michael Reiter, actually went, "Well, this is ridiculous. We're not getting anywhere." And so he phoned the FBI. he contacted the FBI, and the FBI started conducting their own investigation alongside the state. They identified 80, 80 victims, 40 of which were minors. During the investigation, they found out that Jeffrey Epstein, for his birthday, had 12-year-old triplets flown to him from France on his private jet in order for him to molest on his birthday. And young girls were also trafficked to him across the globe, mostly coming from Jean-Luc Brunel, who's that fashionista who, if you remember, was also accused of paedophilia and died in mysterious circumstances in a police cell. So in May of 2006, this is when the famous document listing all of these different cases, and I think it's about 80 pages long. It's called it's an indictment for the unlawful sex with minors, and it details huge amounts of these girls. It's revolting document. I read the whole thing. The only slight takeaway from it that gives you any sort of glimmer of anything positive is the fact that it reveals that apparently Jeffrey Epstein had a very severely deformed penis, and it was shaped like an egg.
Oh God.
Other than that, it's just pages and pages of grimness detailing what he would do, which is, again, coerce these girls into giving naked massages, and then he would abuse them either with his hands or with a vibrator, and masturbate in front of them. Sometimes he would have sex with them. Sometimes he forced himself on girls, but it seems that the majority of it is sort of this masturbation. Doesn't make it any better by any stretch of the imagination. It's just that there is a sort of an idea that he was raping all these girls, and again, he's a monster. But the actual details are even more, in a way, even more sort of like grim and slimy, and like, do you know what I mean? Like he's almost like he's separating himself from it. He's a monster. I don't think anybody doubts that. But basically, what happened was the state turned around, despite all this evidence from the FBI, and they charged him with a single charge of soliciting a prostitute. There was no mention of them being underage. There was nothing like that. But the FBI was still running their operation, which was called Operation Leap Year. And basically, he was indicted in June 2007. An indictment is basically a list of charges. Usually, it's like a one-page document or something like that. Jeffrey Epstein's indictment was 53 pages long.
Oof.
53 things that he could have been 53 pages of things that he could have been charged with. Now, what was strange was that basically Alan Dershowitz, that legend again, he came and he negotiated a plea deal with Alex Acosta. Alex Acosta was state attorney at the time and would go on to work for the Trump administration about the time that Jeffrey Epstein died. And they arranged for him to drop all federal charges, drop all mention of co-conspirators, drop all serious charges, and he pled guilty to 2 charges of prostitution and got 18 months in prison, and he had to register as a sex offender and pay restitutions. But this deal was actually concealed from all the victims. They had no idea that this was going on. Now, although he was sentenced to 18 months, it wasn't in a state prison. It was in a private wing of an abandoned hospital, essentially, that they'd converted so that he was the only prisoner. He was allowed to leave for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and go back to his home in Palm Beach to work. Now, what was strange was that records show that when he was out and about in the real world, he was buying lots of provisions to take back into jail. Where he was on his own, most of the things that he was buying was Vaseline and Jergens hand cream. Why he wanted to take all that back into the prison where he was there by himself, I've got no idea.
Skincare. It's just skincare.
Evidently, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
You've got to look after your skin, especially as you get older.
This is true, and it is very sort of, sun damage in Palm Beach and stuff like that. Yes, that makes sense.
This is a ridiculous sentence, though.
Isn't it?
I'm honestly not sure I've heard anything you've said actually after the egg penis.
Basically, like, he was then given a year's probation, but he just completely didn't stick to any of the conditions of this probation. He violated it by leaving the country, by leaving the state. He just ignored it, and nothing was done to try and sort of stop him. In 2011, he unsuccessfully tried to get off the sex offenders register, but there was nothing anyway, because if you're a sex offender in New York State, or in New York City, sorry, you're supposed to register every 90 days. Do you know how many times he registered with in the city of New York, or anywhere, in fact?
0.
0. Absolutely 0. Yeah, completely.
It's probably an oversight, I would have thought, just like a clerical thing. Just forgot to write it in his diary.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's easily done. You know, he's evidently got a busy life, and but the reason that Alex Acosta gave for such an incredibly lenient sentence was that he was approached and told to leave it alone, that this matter was well above his pay grade, and that Epstein belonged to intelligence. So this is why he decided that it was better to just basically leave it alone. Now, about this time as well, strangely, this is where Bill Gates decides to make friends with Jeffrey Epstein. Why? We're not entirely sure. It seems, again, one of these particularly injudicious decisions, but that's certainly what happened.
He just did it to troll the conspiracy theorists.
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe he did. Who knows? Right, so we're skimming ahead. Now, he's had a fairly quiet time of it, basically, up until 2014, where pretty much he's like, he's kept under the radar for a few years. But this is where the civil lawsuits start. There's one from Courtney Wild, who was a girl that was used to law girls on his behalf. There's one from Jane Doe 2. And then famously, a year later, the Virginia Roberts or Virginia Giuffre at the time, that lawsuit starts. And basically, these are all starting to say that these girls were not only sort of used for sex, but they were also trafficked and given to prominent members of the public. Now, in 2014, as far as I can find, the first interview on Epstein comes out in the alternative media. Now, this is listed as the first interview on Epstein, and it's by a bloke called Ed Opperman interviewing a gentleman called Robert Morrow. I know Ed. Ed's a nice guy. He's a private detective from America, and he interviews this guy called Robert Morrow. And it's a really good interview. They basically lay out the entire story that we've just told about all the sweetheart deal and where Epstein got his money from. And one of the things that they point out is at this point, and this is 2014, where after the lawsuits have just supposedly started, as far as we can see, by 2014, Epstein had already settled out of court with 32 victims.
Ooh.
32.
Wow.
Which is incredible. Yeah. The following year, when Virginia Roberts starts talking about the case, and she mentions Prince Andrew and Alan Dershowitz and those other people on her list, and it's at this point that the fabled Little Black Book is revealed. Now, this Little Black Book, it's an address book. Now, what people don't know is it's not actually Epstein's. It belongs to Ghislaine. This came out later. It's Ghislaine, but Ghislaine almost acts as his secretary, almost arranging some of his appointments, arranging some of his sexual liaisons, arranging for him to get into contact with various people that could help him in whatever way. Now, this book was stolen in 2009 by a butler called Alfredo Rodriguez, and he tried. This doesn't seem like the best option. He said he tried to sell it to prosecution lawyers during their civil lawsuit for a $50,000 fee. And can you believe that the police went, but that's evidence, which you've stolen. And so they arrested him, and he got 18 months for it. Now, this book is 97 pages long. There's 1,571 names and over 5,000 numbers. There's names such as John Mappin of Turning Point UK is in there. Toby Young of the Free Speech Union is in there. Donald Trump is in there. Prince Andrew's in there. Eid Barak is in there. There's also quite a lot of sort of like dull names, like the local takeaways and a dry cleaners that he frequents and stuff like that. So whilst a lot of people have suggested that this might indicate some strangeness, for example, like there's 38 names in this book, including Trump, Prince Andrew, and Eid Barak, that are all circled. And there's been no explanation as to why these are circled. But this isn't a list of clients. This is just his address book.
Yeah.
That's what it is, basically. So as much as I like teasing John Mappin on Twitter by going, I thought you didn't know the old Jeffrey Epstein. How come you're in his address book? It is literally just his address book, basically. Like, it may be an indication of something very, very dodgy, but it's certainly not proof, which is a shame, basically. The other thing that sort of I found out about Jeffrey Epstein, which doesn't sit right with me at all, is that he was actually a massive fan of the comedian Bill Hicks.
Oh no.
Yeah, which is horrible, really, isn't it? Like, he also likes Sam Kinison as well. I don't know if you know Sam Kinison,
Yeah.
very shouty American the guy. But yeah, so that was an insight into to Jeffrey Epstein.
Well, I don't know. Bill Hicks was a bit of a freak as well. You know, he was very overtly sexual.
Yeah, his goat boy and
Yeah,
stuff like that.
exactly.
When he's describing Waco, he says, "Isn't this guy weird? Isn't this David Koresh? He's like obsessed with the Bible, messianic, failed rock star, thinks he's God, trying to screw every young girl in sight, and he's armed to the teeth." Well, I hate to tell you this, but he sounds kind of like all my friends back home, back in Austin. Anyway, we digress. Now, 2016, the allegations about Epstein and Trump came out. And this is also about the time that basically we're starting to hear Maria Farmer and various other people say that he's raped her, that they've been raped in the early 90s. And so this is really starting to snowball, and we're getting a big sort of idea about who Epstein is. At a similar time in 2016, Ghislaine Maxwell was actually tricked into admitting that she had sexual tapes of Donald Trump and Bill Clinton. And she was tricked into this by 60 Minutes. What happened was 60 Minutes was doing an interview with her, and it's a bloke called Ira Rosen. And he basically just turned around and went, "Cut the nonsense. I want the tapes. I want the tapes. I know he was videotaping everything, and I want the tapes of Trump with the girls." To which Maxwell answered, "I don't know where they are." And Rosen figures out, oh Christ, she's just tacitly admitted to this. So he says, well, why don't you ask Epstein? The fate of the country is at stake. Trump could be elected. How would you feel if those tapes emerged after he was in office? Now, she was actually anti-Trump at this point, and so the reporter's trying to get her to expose Trump so that he doesn't get elected. And she says, "I'm the daughter of a press baron. I know the way you people think. If you do one side, you must do the other. If I get you the tapes of Trump, you have to do Clinton too." And then she basically gets all coy and she says to Rosen, "I don't know where these tapes are. Epstein never told me where these tapes are." But this is a tacit admission that these tapes actually exist. Now, in 2017, Sarah Ransom files civil suit, and in 2018, Epstein is interviewed by the New York Times. Now, in this interview in the New York Times, he says a couple of things. Basically, he says that he thinks it's perfectly okay to have sex with underage girls. He says that it's perfectly natural and it shouldn't be considered deviant. He also says that he's friends with Bill Clinton and Woody Allen, and he shows photos of himself with those two people, and also pictures of him with the Prince of Saudi Arabia. He starts bragging about working with Elon Musk and saying that basically he's behind a lot of Elon Musk's most recent ideas. Now, this, I have to say, there's no proof of, and Elon Musk has vehemently denied, absolutely completely denied. But one of the interesting things that Epstein says to this reporter is that he's got loads of dirt on people, specifically tech people in Silicon Valley. He says he knows all the sex and drug secrets of numerous Silicon Valley tech people. And he doesn't elaborate on that. But again, it's painting this rather interesting picture of his connections and the potential things that he might do. July 6th, 2019, Epstein is arrested. The FBI raid his New York mansion and they find thousands of pictures of underage naked girls. They find CD-ROMs and videos with labels on them, such as young so-and-so and so-and-so, indicating that there might be videos with either numerous girls on there, potentially even, I don't know, clients or whatever. And they also find $70,000 in cash, 48 diamonds, and his Austrian passport from the 1980s. Now, at the same time, he was also being investigated in France for rape. And for whatever reason, he decided that he was going to go to Israel, but decided right at the very last minute he wasn't. He was going to go home to New York, at which point he was arrested, and almost simultaneously charges were brought against him in France for the rape of a minor. Now, again, How is Epstein bouncing about all over the places? Well, he has a very famous plane. It's a Boeing 727 private jet, which is referred to by himself, crazily, and various other people as the Lolita Express. Now, Lolita is a book about a man that becomes attracted to a very, very young girl. We spoke about it at length in our Stanley Kubrick podcast because Kubrick did a very, very excellent film based on the book. Now, it's always been suggested that anybody that's been on this plane must be dodgy. Now, that's not necessarily true. I mean, one of the people that went on there was Kevin Spacey. Oh, no, wait, actually, that's not true. But the list of people who've actually been on this plane is in 2002, Bill Clinton, Kevin Spacey, and Chris Tucker were on the plane several times. Clinton's been on the plane 27 times, but all of these have been either to Africa or to sort of, he's essentially hired the plane. There's no evidence that he's gone to the island or any of these people have gone to the island apart from Dershowitz and Clinton, who apparently Virginia Roberts saw there. But between 2002 and 2003, Bill Clinton flew 4 times with staff and Secret Service. But apparently there's been 5 times of the 27 when there's no Secret Service listed, which, if not dodgy, is certainly poor practice for somebody that has been accused of sexual transgressions in the past and, connected to such a cagey figure. Mark Epstein said under oath that Donald Trump had flown multiple times on the Lolita Express. In 2003, Epstein flew to Cuba with the Colombian president Andres Pastrana Arango at the invitation of the Cuban former dictator Fidel Castro. So again, he's rubbing shoulders with some very, very impressive people. Now, according to the pilot of the plane, a man called Larry Viscosi, he confirmed these people had definitely been on the Lolita Express. Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Kevin Spacey, Chris Tucker, Prince Andrew, Bill Gates, the famous violinist Itzhak Perlman, the US Senator and former astronaut John Glenn, the Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell, and here's one that never gets mentioned. In fact, this person has interviewed Whitney Webb and various other people about Epstein and strangely never seems to bring this up. Prominent anti-vaxxer and mentalist Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has been spotted on the Lolita Express a number of times by Larry Viscosi, who was the pilot of this plane.
Amazing.
Isn't it? For somebody who basically likes to sort of, pursue the Clinton angle, never mentions that he's been on that plane himself,
Yeah.
which, could give us valuable insight as to at least gauging other people's stories to see if, like, the decor was accurate and stuff like that. Why does Robert F. Kennedy Jr. shy away from such things?
Very puzzling.
Precisely. Another person that Epstein was actually friends with, which again doesn't get brought up a lot, Steve Bannon. Apparently him and Steve Bannon got on like a house on fire. And I find that particularly strange for a number of tangential reasons. I don't know if anyone can remember Steve Bannon's protege from Breitbart, Milo Yiannopoulos.
Oh, God. I'd gone months without remembering he existed.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I am sorry. Anyway, he was quite rightfully deplatformed and destroyed from the internet for sticking up for paedophiles. One of the things that he sort of revealed was that he'd been a guest at numerous boat parties where he'd witnessed very old paedophiles having sex with drugged up twinks. That's essentially paraphrasing his own words. But he wouldn't reveal who these people were because, that's just not on, is it? You can't reveal paedophiles and paedophilic crimes to the public. It's poor form. So anyway, the suggestion was very strongly that he was actually on boat parties with the Hollywood director Bryan Singer. Bryan Singer was also friends with Brock Pierce and Mark Collins Rector. Now, the interesting thing about Brock Pierce and Mark Collins Rector and Chad Shackley, they're all been accused or convicted of child sex acts, found in possession of child porn. Mark Collins Rector is actually in prison for paedophilic crimes at the minute. Do you know what connects Brock Pierce, Mark Collins Rector, and Chad Shockley, those 3 prominent child sex offenders? They are all in a company with one other person, Steve Bannon. This company was basically, it was a World of Warcraft style company, and what they did was they searched, they do the things that basically players can't be bothered to do. They mine for gold or whatever. They buy really sort of like high power weapons or whatever it is that you need to make the game work, and then they sell those in the game for real cash outside of the game. So they're like almost like cheat codes that you can buy. Bizarrely, Steve Bannon, friends with prominent paedophile Jeffrey Epstein and protege to paedophile apologist Milo Yiannopoulos, was in a company with 3 paedophiles. Now that is unusual, isn't it?
But we don't want to offer any guilt by association. But
no, absolutely not. No, not at all. But again, it does seem to be a bit of a theme that's running through this.
Yeah.
And I wonder if later we'll find out that there's anybody else that's connected to Jeffrey Epstein that has also got similar, rather strange connections.